Welcome everybody, I'm John Walley, and today we have a special treat. We're going to be talking about early access to Tenable OT versions 4.6. There's some major changes in this, so typically what we walk through when we see a version change is we'll walk through all the differences, but today we're going to get to see early access and what's coming in Tenable OT. And what's going to be included also is how to update from an ISO instead of doing the normal kind of download that we do with a regular update. So there's kind of two portions of this video. It's going to be a little bit longer. We're going to go through how to do an offline update through ISO. And then we're also going to go through some of the major changes that are coming out with the 4.6 version. So let's go ahead and jump in. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Overview. And in the Overview section, we're going to go down to our Update Management. Now, I've already downloaded the ISO. That's been really nice of Tenable to come along. They've given us access to early access files, so we'll be able to go out there and show the new content even before it hits the street. So let's go ahead and go to upload a new offline ISO update. So you're going to log into Cockpit and port 8000. We're going to go down to updates and we're going to click this upload new offline update. I'm going to go ahead and click on the file and I'm going to say open. And this will take a few minutes. So we're going to speed the video up here. You'll see a pop-up come up here that it starts uploading the file. When this gets done, we'll start going through the process of the actual update or upgrade so that we can install the new version. Once our file is uploaded, what you'll notice is we're going to automatically go into this checking for updates. So the system's going to go through and look at the new file that we just uploaded. You'll see a success down here at the bottom. The upload is complete, and now we can update those or put those in. Now, what you're going to notice is we're going to see this error. This is normal. What this typically means is we have to do a reboot. And a lot of times you'll see a lot of different errors up at the top too when this happens. That's okay. All we have to do is go through reboot the system, and then it'll go ahead and update everything that we need from the files that we just uploaded. So I'm going to go to Overview. I'm going to hit Reboot. I'm going to say no delay. I'm going to say reboot here again. And this will take a few minutes to go through and do the full reboot. As soon as that's done, we'll come back to the video. Okay, it looks like our system is rebooted. We're going to go ahead and log in. And what we'll see as we go down to our update management is we can go check and install for our updates. All right, it looks like our updates have been installed and we're ready to move forward with the upgrade of our system. So much like when we're doing online upgrades, all we have to do is go up to the Tenable OT security. We'll check what our RPM version is versus what our application version is. And you'll see the difference now that we've installed this. So our RPM version is now 4.6.23 and our application version is 4.5.54. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to hit the little blue button to say that we want to upgrade Tenable OT security. Now, while we're waiting on this to install, I'm going to go ahead and take us over to docs.tenable.com. We can start looking at what's in the new release. So if we go to Tenable OT Security, and we'll see this early access on 4.6.23, which is what we're installing right now. Let's go take a look at what's new. This is something that we've been asking from Tenable for a long time. We're all used to how Nessus works and the way that we do Nessus scans. And there's been a big gap between Tenable OT security and running Nessus against IT-based assets like engineering workstations and what you can actually do from something like Nessus Pro or from Security Center. This ability really comes down to how we handle credentials. The way that Tenable OT used to work before early access, and one of the features we're going to cover is Nessus scanning in this environment, is that now we can add credentials based on individual assets instead of whole scans, and we can put that as a part of the scan policy, much like you could in the days of Nessus Pro versus going into Tenable OT security. So we're going to jump into that step by step. Let's go check on our progress. So it says we're still installing. You'll see that we're going through the process now, and what we're going to look for as it goes through this install and upgrade is the startup process. This can take a little while to do this full upgrade, so just be patient. All right, it looks like we're at the starting Tenable OT security, which is exactly what we've been waiting for. So now the front end is going to take a few minutes for it to get started up. But as we start getting into that and when we're waiting on this, let's go back over to our new features. And the first thing you're going to see, there's going to be some centralized monitoring of subnet management, which is really good. We're going to have active scanning and vulnerability management. And this is what I was referring to when we say we do not use credentials. So the way Tenable OT used to work is you would put in your WMI credentials, you would put in your SSH credentials, or whatever credentials you wanted to use for Nessus scanning, and it almost did like a round robin. So what would happen is it would try the first set of credentials, and then the second set of credentials, and the third set of credentials. And it wasn't really good at saying use these credentials for this asset or for this scan. It kind of did what the second thing was, is just tried all available credentials. But now I can use only specific credentials based on very targeted assets. And so this was like a big piece or a big part of what this was. Now there's a lot of other things, including like the ability to like integrate with Tenable One. And we'll get into a whole video on Tenable One and what it provides and how where Tenable OT integrated into Tenable One gives you a lot more visibility around things like scorecards. One of the biggest things that you'll see too is the type of assets that are being pulled in. So if we go down and we look at our improvements here for new content, what you're going to see is now we're moving into kind of different systems. We've always done the Siemens and the Honeywells and those kind of things, but you're starting to see things like Starlink. And as a user of this tool, we've been out on oil and gas platforms and those kind of things. And so you'll have multiple kinds of communication going back and forth, but Starlink is one of them. You're starting to see this more and more across oil and gas and power in general. So it's the idea that we're starting to see new types of devices, not just our kind of our controllers and the things that we've seen in the past, but communication devices such as Starlink is big. So let's go ahead and jump into the front end. We should be up and running, and we're going to log in and we're going to talk about these credentials, and we're even going to kick off a scan. All right, so when we jump into the front end of Tenable OT, the first thing we want to make sure is that our version is updated, which it is. We're on 4.6.23, and we're going to set up our credentials. So I'm going to go into Active Queries, which is where our Nessus scans are found. We're going to go all the way over to Credentials, and you're going to see we've already set up a few here. I'm going to right click on the one for SSH. You could just as easily do this for WMI or any other kind of credential that you have out there. Just for this video, we're going to be playing with SSH because we're going to scan a small box that we got from NVIDIA, the DGX Spark, that we're running a smaller version of Ember on. So you can kind of see how this works. This is just as easily could have been like a network device. It could be a Linux device that's out there, or you could be using WMI for things like engineering workstations. So this is just to kind of show how this works and how we can pick credentials. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say edit here just so that you can see it. I have a username, a description. I have my username here. I'm going to put in my password, and I'm going to test an IP and just make sure that my credentials are working. We'll see that our credentials worked. So I'm going to hit save here just to make sure that I have that available for when we start building our Nessus scan. Now, as we jump over to Nessus scans, you may end up seeing a message like this. This is all right. This is normal because we just upgraded all of our system, including all of our databases for plugins, all of our actual plugins, both active and passive have gone in there. So all of these updates are coming into the back end. Just give it time. This will clear up. What we're going to end up doing is we'll fast forward through the video so you don't have to wait on this, but I wanted you to just see this loading so you know this could be part of the process, meaning that it may be up to like 30 minutes before you can do active scanning after you upgrade your machine. All right, so now we're jumping over the Nessus scans and it looks like all of our plugins are updated and we're good to get started on setting up and configuring our Nessus scan. Now, one of the first things we need to do is make sure that the assets that we're actually scanning is able to be scanned. If you don't, you're going to end up with an error. And I'm going to show this and I'm going to show you how to fix it. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say create a scan. And we're just going to call this something like test 2 or test 3 or whatever you see. We've done a few of these. I'm going to put in my IP address of 10.2.9.166 that we saw before and we tested. And when we go down to credentials, you're going to see something new here. We can try all available credentials, which we've seen in the past. We can use no credentials, which is the same as doing a non-credentialed or uncredentialed scan, like which you can typically do in Nessus Pro, or we can use specific credentials. In this scenario, I'm going to show you, we can use the Walley credential for SSH that we set up before. I'm going to go down and we can go through each one of our settings. I'm going to leave all these as default and I'm going to hit next. When I go into next, I know the box I'm scanning is Ubuntu. If you're doing regular scanning and it's not for a video, I would recommend just leaving everything checked. Nessus, as a part of Tenable OT, is smart enough to know not to check Windows things on a Unix box and those kind of things. So it doesn't buy you a lot. I just don't want to do all the Linux checks that are out there. So I'm going to go do Ubuntu and I'm going to search on this. I'm only going to select my Ubuntu plugins and I'm going to hit save. And what you'll see here is you're going to get this failed to create a Nessus scan. So why in the world would that happen? Well, there's protections built into Tenable OT that are not built into your traditional scanning platform like a Nessus Pro or Security Center with Nessus tied to it as a scanner. So the first thing we have to do is figure out, like, why was this blocked? Why is it going through and saying we can't scan this asset? And there could be a couple of reasons why. Number one, it could be added to our restrictions list saying we're not allowed to scan that IP, but we don't have any restrictions here. So let's go to inventory and let's do a search for our IP address. And you'll see we have a 10.2.9.166 here. I'm going to go ahead and hit search and you'll see that there is a type column here. And because Tenable OT is extremely careful about what Nessus is allowed to do, because Nessus could be very dangerous in OT environments, it's set up some protections that only certain types of devices are allowed to be scanned. So the way that it learns through the inventory is everything comes in first as an endpoint. As it learns more and more about that device, then we can go in and say, oh, this is maybe a server or this is a workstation. But right now, because this is new, Tenable OT doesn't really know what this device is. We can kind of see what the name is. We can see some individual details on this as far as like who makes this, what's the MAC address, but we can't really go any further than that. So what we need to do is tell it that this is a safe device. For example, I know that this is a workstation or server type architecture. So I can go to actions and I can go to edit. And instead of saying that this is an endpoint, I can go in and say this is actually a Unix or Linux workstation. I can save this. I can go back to my inventory where we were before, and now you'll see the type has changed. If I go to active queries, I go to my Nessus scans, and now we create that same scan. Let's say our test 2, like we did before, 10.2.9.166, and we could put our /32 if we wanted to. We're going to choose specific credentials. We're going to do the same thing, the Walley that we did before. We're going to say next. We're going to do our Ubuntu checks. I'm going to unselect everything except for my Ubuntu local checks. I'm going to hit save. And now what you'll see this time is this will actually save our scan. So you're going to see it update here. And then it's going to come in and we will see our test 2. Now all we have to do is click on this. We can go to actions and we can say run now, or you can right click on it and say run now as well. So we're going to kick this off. This will take a few minutes for it to get going and started. So we're going to fast forward through this portion and let our scan finish up. So while we're waiting on our scan to finish, let's jump into some different information here, because I told you there was a lot of changes with this new release of 4.6. So let's go back and look at our early access information here. One of the other things that you'll see is there's been this massive subnet scale expansion, and it's more than just an expansion. It's really tied to how the tool works. So let's take a look at this. So if we go down to our actual settings and we go into our monitored network, you're going to see something that looks very different now. before we used to have this window where we could turn on our kind of our private IP address space, and then we could put in these different subnets. But now this page looks very different. It allows us to do a lot of very unique things. Used to, passive monitoring was just on by default, and if we had it turned on or if we had it turned off, it was kind of an all or nothing thing. And there really wasn't an option even. I know I said turned off, but it's always just kind of on. What I mean by turned off is we decided whether or not we wanted to inject spam data or not. But there was always a little bit of data that came in. Well, with this change, the way they've set up said subnets, the way that we monitor them and set them up is very unique and very different than what we've done in the past. So for example, what I can do is I can say on 1.100, I can go in and do passive monitoring only on this network. Or on 10.10.0.0, I can do only active on this network, and I can modify each one of these. I can add full subnets, full list of subnets, or individual subnets. So let's take a look at this. If I go and add a new subnet, you can see it allows me to add one, or it allows me to add a whole list, which will give me my whole list of subnets here. But beyond that, it also gives me some other pieces of information. So if I go into edit subnet here, what you'll see is now I can add in not just my subnet range, but I can say, do I want passive monitoring? Why does this matter? Why would this really impact anything? This comes down to how we view risk. If you look at the way a risk score is done, one of the things that's handled in here is, are you monitoring events? And are those events actually gone through and looked at and resolved and those kind of things? So before we had monitoring always turned on, but maybe you don't want to use a tool for its IDS capabilities. You only want to use it for its vulnerability management kind of things. So by having everything turned on previously under monitored, what that would do is give you these higher risk scores that were escalated because nobody was going and closing out events. But now you have control over this with this monitoring switch. I can actually give it a network name, a description, and tie it back to a specific subnet. So that means maybe one network I want to monitor, another I don't. And so what that allows me to do is set up, I want to track it for vulnerability management, but I don't necessarily want passive monitoring here. And it gives you a little bit of information about the subnet, if it's enabled, if it captures traffic, allows you to run active queries, those kind of things if you're active or if your monitoring is on. So this gave us a lot more granular way of looking at individual subnets that we may be seeing, not just do we run active against it or not. All right, let's go check on our scan and see if it's done. So we're going to go back up to active queries and we're going to go to Nessus scans, and it looks like it's still running. We're going to fast forward through this portion of the video and we'll jump back in when our scan is finished. Okay, going back to active queries and Nessus scans, we see now that our test 2 has completed. Now, one of the differences you'll see between something like a Nessus Pro or Security Center, where's our data? Like, where's our scan data? How do we go look at the results from our scan? Like, if I go in here, like, I don't have a way I can edit or delete or run it, but where do I actually see the results? So this video is not going to be about looking at risk and the vulnerabilities that are associated with assets, even though you can do that, but it's not done on a scan by scan basis the way it is in other tools. But I want to show you the outcome. So before, when we looked at inventory and we went into our device, which the IP address was the 166 address we see here, I'm going to search on this and I'm going to go click on the actual name here. I don't know if you remember this, but before, we didn't know a lot of information about this device. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know what the operating system was, those kind of things. We also didn't know what vulnerabilities were associated with it. But now I'm starting to get more details. Number one, I can see is like, instead of just having local ports and sensors, now I also know that I have information from Nessus as well, because we ran that information. I can also see that I have scan information so that we can see, hey, it took 17 minutes to run that scan. So in that little short period of time that you were waiting, I was actually waiting for 17 minutes for this to complete. So where do I see my vulnerabilities? Well, I can see it in a few places. If I go to vulnerabilities now, before what I used to have is only 4, now I say I have 40. And so I can go look at this little area here, and this will tell me each one of my vulnerabilities, what the plugin is, and what the status of that vulnerability. This actually looks to be in decent shape. We have a couple of self-signed certificates, which we know about. We see some time step certificate stuff here, but in general, we're not seeing any major vulnerabilities. Most of these are just info based on our scan. So we know we have a pretty clean box, and that's actually good for Ember because that's what we're developing on. So outside of our certificates, we know we're clean. So what I was able to do is go in and do a credentialed scan using very specific credentials. Unlike before, we'd have to run through every one of these. And I could also go in and say, I only want to do active or I only want to do passive on this specific subnet. For example, on 10.2.9.0/32, for example, or 24, or whatever we want it to be. So hopefully this video has been helpful. If it has, please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more of these. I really want to thank Tenable for this video. The ability to go out and release new information before the world's seeing it so they can look at it and see what the next updates are going to be is huge. Until next time, have a great day.